I was in the middle of washing the breakfast dishes when my phone vibrated on the counter. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another bank notification or some random spam email. But something made me pause. I wiped my hands on a towel, picked up my phone, and read the message. I can't do this anymore. I need a real partner, not a worthless, lazy burden. I'm filing for divorce. Don't bother calling me. I've already made up my mind. For a moment, my mind went blank. The words stared back at me, cold and final. A worthless, lazy burden. That's what my husband thought of me. That's what he had probably been thinking for months, maybe even years. I expected to feel heartbreak. I expected a lump in my throat, a wave of sadness, a desperate need to plead or explain myself. But as I stood there, phone in hand, something else washed over me instead. Relief. Of course, Nathan would do this over text. The man who once claimed to love me, who promised me a lifetime together, couldn't even look me in the eye when he ended it. He had always been like that, taking the easiest route, avoiding confrontation unless he was sure he'd come out on top. But the funny thing was, I wasn't devastated, not even surprised. I was just disgusted. Nathan had changed ever since I stepped away from work. I had spent years building a successful career, working myself to exhaustion, and when the stress finally caught up to me, when I needed a break to recover, he made it clear that he resented me for it. He hated the idea of being the sole provider, even though we had more than enough. Even though I had supported him when he was struggling, even though he had never once worried about money since the day he met me. Nathan liked control. He liked feeling powerful. And to him, my decision to step back from work made me weak, dependent, and useless. But here's what Nathan never bothered to find out. I wasn't some helpless, unemployed wife living off his paycheck. The company he spent years climbing the corporate ladder in, the one he took so much pride in, the one he treated like his personal empire, was mine. And tomorrow, he was about to learn just how badly he had underestimated me. That night, Nathan came home late, just like always. He barely looked at me as he walked through the front door, tossing his keys onto the counter like I wasn't even there. "I assume you got my text," he muttered, loosening his tie. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, like he was talking about returning a broken appliance instead of ending our marriage. I nodded. His eyes flicked to me, searching for a reaction. Was I crying? Panicking? Was I going to beg him to stay? I did none of those things. Instead, I stood there calmly, drying the last dish, completely unshaken. "And?" he asked, impatience creeping into his voice. "And what?" I countered. He let out a sharp breath, like I was wasting his time. "You have nothing to say, no arguments, no apologies." I met his gaze evenly. "You made your choice. What else is there to say?" For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of hesitation, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his jaw tensed like he wasn't sure whether to feel victorious or disappointed. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He expected anger. He expected tears. Instead, I was standing in front of him, perfectly composed, like he was the least important thing in the room. And that bothered him. Nathan recovered quickly, scoffing as he grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Figures. You never had much to say. Just coasting through life while I handle everything. It's about time I stopped carrying dead weight." There it was, the final insult. I exhaled slowly, setting my dish towel down. My fingers no longer trembled. My voice no longer wavered. "You should get some rest," I said softly. "You have a big day at work tomorrow." His smug smirk returned. "Damn right I do. A real future, a future with someone who actually contributes." I smiled. "Good luck with that." What Nathan didn't know, what he never even considered, was that tomorrow he wouldn't just be my soon-to-be ex-husband. Tomorrow I would be his boss. Nathan left early the next morning, whistling as he walked out the door, completely unaware of the storm he was about to walk into. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in my executive office, reviewing the morning reports. It had been a while since I had been this hands-on with the company, but today? Today, I intended to make my presence known. My assistant knocked on the door. "Jessica, the employee termination list is ready for review." I took the folder from her, flipping through the names. I already knew which one mattered most. There it was. Nathan Reynolds, Department Head, Sales Division. I tapped my fingers against the desk, savoring the moment. "Send him in." A few minutes later, Nathan strolled into the office, shoulders squared, confidence radiating off him. He had no idea he was walking straight into his own demise. He shot a lazy smile at the receptionist, charming as always. "Morning, Alice. Big day ahead. The boss in?" She returned a tight smile, barely concealing her amusement. "She's waiting for you?" Nathan frowned slightly but shrugged it off. He stepped into the office, then stopped. His smirk vanished the second he saw me sitting behind the desk. I leaned back in my chair, meeting his shocked gaze with an unwavering, calm expression. "Good morning, Nathan." For the first time, he was speechless. He blinked, glancing around the room like he had walked into the wrong office. What is this?" I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Have a seat." He didn't move. His brain was still trying to process what was happening, like a computer stuck in an endless loading screen. "Jessica," he said slowly, "why are you here?" I folded my hands neatly on the desk. "I own this company, Nathan." Silence. He scoffed, shaking his head. "No, you don't." I smiled. "Yes, I do." Nathan's face contorted with disbelief, then frustration, then something else. Something closer to fear. "You expect me to believe that? You don't even have a job, Jessica. You've been sitting at home for years, living off my paycheck." I tilted my head. "Your paycheck? The one I sign?" Nathan flinched, just barely, but I caught it. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the official ownership documents, my name, my title, my control over every department, including his. Nathan's fingers twitched as he opened it. His eyes scanned every line, and with each passing second, the color drained from his face. His breathing changed. The realization was sinking in. Everything he thought he knew, his career, his success, his power, was built on a lie. A lie he had told himself. His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked up at me, completely lost. This isn't possible." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "It's very possible, Nathan, and so is this." I reached for another folder. His termination letter. His world was about to crumble, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Nathan's hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents. His mouth opened, then shut again. His breathing had changed, shallower now, more erratic. He was trying to process what he was looking at, trying to make sense of the impossible. This isn't real," he finally muttered, shaking his head. "You're lying." I exhaled softly, almost pitying him. Almost. "Nathan, for once in your life, stop talking and read." He did, and with each passing second, I could see the weight of realization crashing down on him. My name, my title, my control. His fingers twitched over the final page, the one that listed his department under my ownership. He swallowed hard. "This is a joke, right?" I tilted my head. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Nathan's jaw clenched, his entire body tense like a cornered animal. "You let me work here for years. You let me think that you were important?" I finished for him. "That you were in control? That your so-called hard work is what built your career?" I leaned forward. "Nathan, you spent years bragging about how essential you were. You thought you were untouchable, and yet, the one thing you never bothered to do," I tapped the folder, "read the fine print." A thick, tense silence filled the office. Then he scoffed. The arrogance was trying to make a comeback. His pride, his ego, they were fighting desperately to keep him afloat. "So what?" he sneered. "You brought me in here just to humiliate me, just to show off your power?" He leaned back, arms crossed, forcing a smirk. "Pathetic." I smiled. "No, Nathan." I slid a second folder across the desk. "I brought you here to fire you." His smirk vanished. His eyes darted to the folder. He hesitated, like touching it would make it real. Slowly he opened it. The words stared back at him, crisp and final. Termination letter. Nathan Reynolds. Effective immediately. He blinked. Once, twice. Then a slow, dawning horror spread across his face. You can't do this, he whispered, voice hollow. You don't have a reason. I let out a soft, amused breath. Oh, Nathan, you give me too much credit. I don't need a reason. But I had plenty. I picked up another document and started reading aloud. Multiple complaints from employees regarding a toxic work environment. Failure to meet performance targets for 3 consecutive quarters. Reports of inappropriate behavior towards female colleagues. Nathan's face darkened. His breathing turned heavier. This is personal, he hissed. You're using our divorce to get back at me. I leaned back, folding my hands. No, Nathan, this is professional. I paused, letting the words sink in. But let's not pretend it doesn't feel damn good. His nostrils flared, his hands clenched. You'll regret this, he seethed. You're making a huge mistake. I tilted my head. Doubt it. A knock at the door. Security. Nathan turned, disbelief flickering across his face. You're actually serious, he muttered. As a heart attack, I replied. The security guard stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, we need you to leave the premises. Nathan turned back to me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might break a tooth. This isn't over, he warned, voice low. I met his gaze unwavering. Oh, Nathan, I smiled. It's just getting started. And with that, security escorted him out. That night, I expected him to come home in a fit of rage, throwing accusations, demanding explanations. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text. You think this is over? I'll take half of everything in the divorce. You'll regret this, I smirked. Nathan, if only he knew. I didn't respond. Let him stew in his delusions a little longer. Tomorrow, reality would hit him like a freight train. The next morning, I walked into the office to an unusual energy in the air. Employees whispered in clusters, excitement barely concealed. At exactly 8:17 a.m., my assistant knocked on my door. Jessica, we just got a call from the legal department. She looked almost amused. Nathan is trying to file a wrongful termination lawsuit. I let out a low, amused hum. Predictable. I leaned back in my chair. And? She smirked. They're not worried. He has no case. We have extensive documentation on his misconduct. Complaints, financial mismanagement, underperformance. She waved a hand. HR is already handling it. I nodded. Let me know if there are any developments. She left, and I went back to reviewing reports. But at exactly 12:03 p.m., she rushed back in. This time, her face was wide with amusement. You need to see this. She handed me her phone. I glanced at the screen. It was a company-wide email. Subject, immediate announcement regarding Nathan Reynolds. Dear team, as of today, Nathan Reynolds is no longer employed at our company. Additionally, an internal review has revealed concerning financial activity under his department, including unauthorized budget allocations and misuse of company funds. A formal investigation is underway. We encourage any employees with additional information to come forward. Sincerely, Human Resources Department. I let out a whistle. That was fast. My assistant gave me a knowing look. I think HR has been waiting to get rid of him for a while. No doubt. Nathan had spent years believing he was above consequences, that his charm and smooth talking could cover up his incompetence. But the truth always finds its way to the surface. At that moment, my phone buzzed. Nathan. I let it ring. Then a text popped up. What did you do? I smiled, but before I could even put my phone down, another message appeared. This time, from an unknown number. Jessica, I don't know if you remember me, but I used to work under Nathan. I thought you should know. He's been taking credit for other people's work for years, and there's more. I have proof. I sat up straighter. Proof, I quickly typed back. Tell me everything. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Ben, a former employee Nathan had forced out months ago. He was furious. I had a project, he said, bitterness laced in every word. One I worked on for months. At the last second, Nathan took credit for it, changed the name on the final proposal, and made sure I was reassigned before I could fight back. My stomach twisted. That's worse than I thought, I muttered. Ben clenched his jaw. I have emails, screenshots, I kept everything. I exhaled slowly. Nathan hadn't just been incompetent. He had actively destroyed other people's careers just to prop up his own. And now? Now he was going to pay for it. Nathan stormed into my house at exactly 6:45 p.m. He didn't knock, didn't hesitate. He slammed the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. His entire body was tense, fists clenched at his sides, his face flushed red with barely contained rage. I didn't even flinch. I was sitting in the living room sipping a glass of wine, completely unfazed. His eyes locked onto me, furious. "What the hell is going on, Jessica?" he barked. "HR is investigating me. People are talking about fraud. This is a damn witch hunt." I swirled the wine in my glass, savoring the moment. "You mean an investigation into your misconduct?" I asked coolly. Nathan's nostrils flared. "You set me up," he accused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You planned this." I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. "Oh, Nathan, you give yourself way too much credit." I leaned forward, placing my wine glass down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "I didn't have to set you up. You did that all by yourself." His chest rose and fell rapidly, the weight of reality pressing down on him. He was scrambling, desperately searching for a way to twist this into something he could control. "I was the best damn employee at that company," he seethed. "This is personal. You're just bitter that I'm leaving you, so you're trying to ruin my life." I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the armrest of my chair. "Bitter?" I repeated, amusement lacing my voice. "Nathan, you are giving yourself way too much importance. Let's be clear, this isn't about our divorce. This is about consequences, something you've never had to face before." His lips curled into a sneer. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I didn't even try to deny it. "Oh, Nathan," I mused, "you have no idea." He took a sharp step forward, pointing a finger at me. "You think this is over? You think you've won? I'll take half of everything in the divorce, Jessica. You'll regret this." I let out a slow, measured breath before standing up. My movements were deliberate, calculated. He had spent years towering over me, years making me feel small, powerless, insignificant. Not anymore. Now I was the one standing over him. "Half of everything?" I said, voice dripping with amusement. "Nathan, you signed a prenup? Did you forget?" The confidence on his face faltered for just a second. "That prenup doesn't cover my time," he snapped. "I worked for years to build that career. That company owes me." I shook my head. "Nathan, you worked for my company." His mouth opened, then snapped shut. "And because you were fired for cause," I emphasized, crossing my arms. "You get nothing. No severance, no bonuses, no benefits, and definitely no money from me." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You can't just cut me off," he muttered, voice lower now, tinged with something dangerously close to desperation. I arched a brow. "Oh, but I can, and I have." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the war happening inside his head, the fight between his pride and his survival instincts. Nathan had never needed to beg before, but now he had no choice. His fingers twitched at his sides, his shoulders rose and fell, and then just barely above a whisper. "Jessica, please." I tilted my head. "Please what?" His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I just need some time to figure things out. You don't have to do this." I studied him carefully. For the first time in years, Nathan looked small, defeated. But I didn't feel sorry for him, not even a little. "Oh, Nathan," I murmured, picking up my wine glass again. "You spent years making sure I felt powerless, that I needed you, that I was just some lazy, useless wife who lived off your hard work." I took a slow sip. "But in the end, it was you who needed me." Nathan's jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. I exhaled dramatically. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important things to do than babysit your tantrum." I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages, already dismissing him. "There's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out." For a second, he didn't move. Then, with a guttural sound of frustration, He spun on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't even flinch. I simply leaned back, stretched my legs, and enjoyed the peace and quiet. Finally, he was gone, or so I thought. A week later, my assistant walked into my office holding a piece of paper, her lips twitching with amusement. "Jessica, you're going to love this." I glanced up. "What now?" She handed me the document. I skimmed the name at the top, then laughed. Nathan Reynolds. He had applied for a job at one of our subsidiary companies. He must not have realized it was still under my control. "Oh, this is too good," I murmured, shaking my head. "Do you want to reject him outright?" my assistant asked, smirking. I thought about it for a second. Then I smiled. "Number, I want them to call him in for an interview." A week later, Nathan sat in a stiff chair in a small boardroom, his cheap suit wrinkled, his shoulders slumped. He had no idea I was coming. He thought he was meeting with a hiring manager. Instead, when the door opened, it was me. His head snapped up, his entire body tensed. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I smiled. "Nathan, what a surprise." His face drained of color. "You," he breathed. I walked over to the desk and casually flipped through his resume. "Let's see. You left your last job off here. Any particular reason?" His jaw tensed. "Jessica, please, I held up a hand. "Let's keep this professional." I skimmed the page, shaking my head. "So, tell me, Nathan, why should we hire you?" Silence. His throat bobbed. I know the industry, I have experience, He exhaled shakily. "I just need a second chance." I leaned forward, folding my hands. "A second chance," I mused. I tapped a finger against my chin. "Tell me, Nathan, how many second chances did you give the people you sabotaged?" His face darkened. "How many second chances did you give me when you called me a lazy burden and walked out?" Silence. I picked up his resume, held it up between my fingers, and ripped it clean in half. Nathan flinched. "I wouldn't hire you for a janitorial position." He inhaled sharply, his fingers twitching like he wanted to throw something. I stood up and walked to the door. I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. "Next time you call a woman a worthless burden, make sure she isn't the one signing your paychecks." And with that, I walked out, leaving Nathan alone in the room, completely powerless. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. Nathan never recovered. For months after that disastrous interview, I heard whispers about him floating through industry circles. He tried everything, applying to smaller companies, reaching out to old contacts, even attempting to start his own consulting business. But there was a problem. Nathan had spent his entire career burning bridges, stepping on people to climb higher, taking credit for work that wasn't his. Now, every door was slammed in his face. The moment his name appeared on a job application, HR departments would forward his file to legal, who would then advise against hiring him. His old coworkers had no interest in helping him out. His former employees, many of whom he had belittled and mistreated, were thriving without him. And the companies that did consider him? Well, it didn't take them long to Google his name, his failed lawsuit, his online meltdown, the HR statement that exposed his financial mismanagement. It was all out there for the world to see. One by one, his options disappeared. Then, one day, I got a call from an old colleague of his, someone who used to admire Nathan before realizing what kind of man he really was. "You'll never guess where I saw your ex-husband today." "Oh," I replied, already intrigued. He was working at a car dealership as a salesman. For a moment, I just sat there, letting that image sink in. Nathan, the man who once scoffed at retail workers, the man who used to brag about his six-figure salary, the man who once told me that he was the reason we had financial stability, selling cars. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped me. Fitting, I mused. He always was good at selling people on things that weren't actually valuable. And that was that. The man who once called me a worthless burden was now struggling to make ends meet, working long hours on commission, praying that someone would buy a car so he could cover his rent. Meanwhile, my company had never been stronger. We had just expanded internationally. We had acquired a rising tech firm, boosting our reputation in the industry, and our stocks had surged after a successful partnership deal. I was thriving. But Nathan? Nathan was drowning. The last I heard, he had moved back in with his parents. Ironic, isn't it? The man who called me lazy and dependent was now living off his mother's generosity. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. 6 months later, I was standing in the middle of a glamorous business gala, a glass of champagne in my hand, as photographers and journalists buzzed around the event. It was a major milestone for my company. We had just secured a multi-million-dollar expansion deal, one that would solidify our place as a leader in the industry. As I stood there, basking in the glow of success, a journalist approached me, microphone in hand. "Jessica, can I ask you a question?" I turned, giving her a polite smile. "Of course." "You've built an empire. Your leadership has turned this company into a powerhouse. What's the secret to your success?" I paused, taking a slow sip of my champagne. Then I smiled. "Never let anyone tell you your worth," I said smoothly, "especially not a man who is threatened by it." The journalist chuckled. The next day, those words were all over social media, attached to articles praising my achievements. And somewhere out there, probably in his parents' basement, probably scrolling through his phone, stewing in his own bitterness, Nathan saw them. And I hoped it burned, because that was the real victory. Not firing him, not blacklisting him, not watching him beg for a job he would never get. The real victory was simply thriving without him. I had moved on, I had flourished, I had built something bigger than he could have ever imagined. And Nathan was just a cautionary tale. A man who thought he could tear a woman down, only to realize too late that she was the one who held all the power. He spent years trying to make me feel small. But in the end, the only thing small about this story was him.